What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Gothic 3, the somewhat divisive final entry from Piranha Bytes into the Gothic series, which I am excited to finally get around to playing after covering the first two games, Gothic 1 and 2 of course. And having covered those games, I was curious about this one because this particular game, while generally pretty well regarded, it doesn't nearly receive the amount of praise that the first two titles do. And in terms of first impressions, I would say I could kind of see why, while also saying that I'm, for the most part, really enjoying what I've played so far. That said, much like the other two entries in the title, this game is unlikely to run for you right out of the box. You're going to have to do some fiddling with it, though in the case of Gothic 3, especially with its Steam release, that is a little bit easier to do than the previous two titles. So for starters, while you will likely be able to start this game just by downloading it off of Steam, once you get into the game, you probably won't be able to play because just the base download is incompatible with modern hardware, which will leave your controls unresponsive, which means you won't be able to do anything. So in order to make the game playable, you have to go into Steam and set the game to a test branch via the properties beta submenu. There is a test branch that will give you the community patch necessary to run the game. So you don't really have to do anything special besides just switch to this test branch and voila, the game will work for you. Now, because the Gothic series is so well loved, there are many more mods and things you can use to make this game what you want it to be, though the only one required is the community patch, which again is very easy to install. Beyond that though, story-wise, this is of course a follow-up to the second title that sees our nameless hero finally escaping from the Isle of Corinus, only to find that the Orc War that has been mostly in the background of the first two titles has come full force as you reach the mainland. As the king, somewhat indirectly responsible for you getting sent to the penal colony to begin with, a colony that was set up to mine magic ore to allow the human kingdom to fight off the orcs, has pretty much failed. The orcs have overrun most of the human territories. They are very much so in control now, with only the last vestiges of holdouts still standing, which makes for an interesting setting. I don't really know what I was expecting here, but I would tell you that the factions, including the orcs, the rebels fighting against them, and a sort of assassins guild, wasn't exactly what I was thinking I was walking into. Because surprisingly, one of the first tasks you're given is to basically run around and do what you can for people, which can include working for the orcs. They are a faction you can join. Though much of the starter area sort of sets all of this dichotomy up. Much of the rather open world nature of Gothic 3 seems to revolve around siding with either the mercenaries or the orcs in various towns, allowing them to take over, which will then push you towards joining one of their factions. Though in classic Piranha Bytes fashion, I will save that for last and try to do everything around the map first. Though with that relatively simple premise nowadays comes a pretty large advancement towards the formula we see in Piranha Bytes later games with, say, the Elix series. For starters, the map here is much, much larger. There are whole towns with many more side quests to give you, many of which are at odds with each other. We also see some of the initial gameplay changes this brings via the skill system, things like just aiming your bow instead of highlighting enemies by looking at their general direction, for instance. And while a lot of it still holds that sort of core Piranha Bytes gameplay, much of it at the same time has changed, and I would say probably nothing more so than the melee combat. It feels a little button mashy compared to the first two, I would say, and while you can do things like parry and work on your timing, it doesn't really feel that way. At least here in the beginning, because another thing that the community patch does is offer an option called alternative balancing. As it's my understanding in the original game, with this being the final entry, you basically become rather godlike towards the end of it, like incredibly overpowered. With this particular game giving you enough skill points and gold to do basically everything, like all playstyles at once, with very few limitations. And the alternative balancing reins a lot of that in and sort of forces you into one playstyle, as there isn't enough skill points to go around. So I'm imagining some of my problems with the combat system, or at least its differences compared to the first two entries largely comes down to that. Though here in the early game, ranged certainly seems like it might be the winner, though magic itself does seem to have been given a bit of a boost. Story-wise, one of the reasons the orcs were able to overrun everything is that when Zardos returned to the mainland, he stripped the paladins and the fire mages of their rune magic. For some reason, it doesn't work anymore, which forces everyone to use ancient magic, including yourself, and the ancient magic seems pretty robust. They give you a lot of options here, or at least it seems like they do, though it's still pretty early game there. So all in all, without rambling for too long and just to keep this to first impressions, I would say that Gothic 3 makes a lot of solid changes to the Gothic formula and brings a lot of it to a much larger world to explore with frankly just more to do, it would seem. But at that very same time, I do have to say this game feels very different from the first two, and some of that is surely down to an engine change, I believe. But those first two games felt more like a slow and steady RPG where you're slowly gaining power and overcoming obstacles, which can lead to you being overpowered by the end. Gothic 3 here really kind of feels a bit more like an action RPG in some ways to me, even though a lot of the core systems are the same, or at least slightly tweaked versions. Which is starting to make it clear to me why this particular entry is so divisive, as I said, because simply put, this is quite a bit different than the first two titles, and change will of course never be universally liked. That will do it for today. I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. If you're looking forward to the review, by all means like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.